Hello. I'm so glad you're here. No geometric storms today, thankfully. Although you'd be mistaken for thinking so, but I'm a leaf fairy. I don't have to look pristine. Which is good, because yesterday we had an Arctic snowstorm in the middle of our spring fairy dance, which we hold every 13th moon. It was most peculiar. Some of us older fairies were saying we've not known the weather to ever do such a thing. But it seems that the senior and elder fairies are saying that the appearance of Jupiter now entering our orbit is bringing with it some great change, which can only be good. Anyway, to see where Thimble's at. She was waiting to go into the darkened forest. Goodness me. A small opening between some brambles and a huge yew tree seemed like the only entrance to the forest Thimble could see. The ground was littered with leaves and broken branches, which looked like a speckled black and green carpet underneath Thimble's tiny feet. She was in absolute awe of how big all the plants and vegetation seemed, which of course it would do because everything was so much smaller in her realm. Right then, sighed Thimble, pulling the shield Perry had given her from her belt so as to help move the brambles and branches just enough for her little frame to squeeze through. But she still managed to snag her skirt on the brambles as she pulled herself through, which ripped a neat triangular hole in the fabric. "Goodness me and bother," she said crossly as she made it through to the other side. But she was soon stood staring in absolute silence at the sight of the forest which now lay before her like a vast, dark, ivy-covered jungle which looked like another world to Thimble. Goodness. And indeed, it was another world to the one Thimble had been used to. Yes, I agree. It doesn't look very nice, does it? She had never seen such a foreboding place, which was both frightening and beautiful at the same time. The forest inside didn't appear to be as dark as it was on the outside once your eyes had acclimatised. It was almost as though the dark leaves on the outside were acting as some form of camouflage to act as a deterrent to stop people going through. Although why on earth you would want to go through there, I don't know. There were giant poison ivy vines which clung to the bark of almost every tree. Standing there, taking in her surroundings, Thimble became aware of how still and quiet it all was. So eerily quiet you could hear your own breath. And as she began to walk, her every step seemed to echo behind her. "This is a very strange place," she whispered to herself, not being able to put her finger on what was missing in the silence. And then it occurred to her there was not one single bird song. No, not one. Not a single flutter of wings, no buzz of bee or squawk from the branches above. So, where have they all gone? Inquired Thimble out loud, little unnerved. And decided that the sooner she was out safely on the other side, the better. I quite agree. She picked up her speed and hoped with all hope that she would make it out of the forest before nightfall. Of course, the forest had not always been called the Blackened Forest. There had once been a time when it was luscious and bright and a wonderful place to dwell. There had been many creatures who had called the forest home, including the green spirits, who were the descendants of the mysterious dryads from the secret land of Rache. The green spirits were a peaceful clan of miniature beings who dwelled in and around the trees across the forest. However, hunchback pixies had decided to make their camps in the forest's woods and trees, and many of the woodland occupants fled in fear of these rat-like beings' wicked ways. Now, I must say, hunchback pixies are not at all like the pixies I have told you about in previous realms. No, not at all. In fact, they were no more a pixie than you or I. Many believe they are the remaining few of a large colony of rats which lived in the caves southwest of the forest. It is said that slowly the rodents started adopting a more upright appearance and concealed their looks with the use of disguises to enable them to steal goods from the nearby pixie realm, undetected. But whether this is actually true or not remains a mystery. However, one thing was definite. They were not beings you would want to bump into, especially in a dark forest, and definitely not if you were a fairy. No. After a while of the hunchback pixie's occupancy in the forest, the trees started to hang their heads, and heavy ivy plants along with thorny brambles started to grow around the forest's beauty. Soon enough, very little daylight could penetrate through its leaves, and visitors would enter at their own peril. It was only the green spirits who were impervious to the hunchback's destruction, and they are believed to still live in the forest to this day, although few have ever reportedly seen them. As I have to warn you, very few have ever made it out to the other side. I know. Thimble had managed to cover a lot of ground and become used to the forest's strange plants and hanging leaves, when something broke the eerie silence and made her stop. It sounded like a faint knocking, like something was banging on the bark of a hollow tree. It sounded rhythmical, almost musical. Thimble froze for a moment to listen, but as soon as it had started, it stopped again. The little fairy decided that she had had enough distractions for one day and veered off in a different direction. She turned a corner and picked up speed, brambles and leaves flying past her as she didn't dare turn back. Once she was sure that she was far away from whatever had caused the strange noises, she felt she could relax a little again, although she would not be happy until she had reached the exit, which seemed to still be far out of reach. I am not at all comfortable in this place, she said, deciding that she should probably stop and read through some of Perry's map to check if he had written anything about banging noises. Seeing the perfect tree to sit under for a while, she headed through the heavy undergrowth surrounding it. She had not yet reached its bark when something to the left of her caught her eye. It was a vast bed of the most colourful toadstools she had ever seen. They were blue and red, green and yellow. Some had orange spots on them, and they seemed to go on for miles. Thimble also noticed that scattered around them were items of clothing, like a purple cloak here and an odd shoe there. Even a few swords were laying around some of the more brightly coloured toadstools. Very strange. Thimble stood pondering on how odd it all was when a voice amongst the hanging ivy said, "The remains of other trespassers like you." And the fairy nearly jumped out of her skin. Glancing down, she could see it was another spider, only this one was much bigger and hairier than Trouble. "Goodness!" said Thimble, catching her breath. "You made me jump!" The spider moved up his ivy vine a little to be face to face with his visitor. "I do tend to do that, I'm afraid," he said. "I need to warn you that this passage is very dangerous. I would go back towards the drums if I were you, fairy girl." And he pointed at the toadstools littered with the garments of other travellers. Thimble certainly did not like the look of it, and was very grateful for the spider's advice, and was just about to turn and head towards the drums when the spider stopped her. "I should probably not tell you this, but the drums you heard were those of hunchback pixies. And you would be wise to head in a different direction," he said, pointing in the direction Thimble had been heading in the first place. Goodness! Thimble looked confused and sat down on a nearby rock. "But that's silly," she said. "If I can't go this way, I need to go that way." And she pulled her map out of her bag. "Well, it's up to you," replied the spider. "But both ways hold a risk. And only you can decide which is the better choice," replied the spider. And he went back up his web. Thimble pondered for a while, and then it dawned on her that this wasn't the first conversation she'd had today with a spider. Well, no. "You must be double," she exclaimed, and it was the spider who jumped this time. "How in all the webs in this forest would you know that?" he asked, slightly flattered that the fairy knew his name. Thimble told him about her meeting with Trouble earlier in that day and how he had been of little help, and hoped that his brother might be more helpful in her quest to make it out of the forest before nightfall. And then she asked him if he would be so kind as to point her in the right direction again. Double looked at Thimble and then the toadstools. "Well, it is not my place to say which is the way is better. But hunchback pixies are very troublesome. However, toadstools are also troublesome, and travellers who pass this way do tend to mysteriously vanish. If I were you, which of course I am not, I would follow the drums." And with that, he disappeared into the forest's undergrowth before Thimble could ask him anything else. There seemed only 2 directions Thimble could go in. The forest foliage was far too thick in any other direction, so she had to make a decision. Toadstools or drums? Goodness me. Then she remembered the warning from Periwinkle's notes. Do not tread on toadstools. Of course. Thank you, Peri, she said confidently, and turned on her heels to go back the way she had come, away from the colourful carpet of toadstools and back towards where she had heard the drums. Oh, those are the calling birds. Goodness me, they came around rather quickly today. Surprised they found their way through this dark place. Anyway, let us hope Thimble has chosen the right direction. I'm sure you'll want to come back and find out. Till next time, take care. And be careful of all this strange weather we're having. And remember, don't stop believing, especially in you.